Welcome to the pod focusing on the aftermath and recovery from the devastating Palisades fires of January 2025. Journalist Joel Pollack, entrepreneur Oren Ezra, and technology expert Ron Goldschmidt serve up to the moment vital news and information, discuss the ongoing recovery efforts, and introduce us to the individuals and trades who are playing key roles in rebuilding our cherished communities. We're diving into the deep end and learning quickly how we can move forward together. We know the pain because we're living real-time news, stories, resources, and insights on the ongoing recovery effort. Buckle up. We're three homeless guys.
Welcome to Three Homeless Guys, the podcast about the Palisades fire and the rebuilding effort. I'm journalist Joel Pollack here with technology expert Ron Goldschmidt, and our friend, entrepreneur Oren Ezra, is out being entrepreneur Oren Ezra. He had a very, very busy week suddenly come up. Even though he set everything up for today, he's not able to be with us, so it's just going to be two homeless guys and one very special guest, Elizabeth Barcohana. Elizabeth, say hello before we give you a bigger introduction later.
Hi, nice to be with you.
It's nice to have you here, and it's good to be here. I've got some news that we can start with, and then Ron, if you have any news, you can share that too before we head to Elizabeth. But I just learned that Marquez School, which is next door to my house, or was next door to my house before it burned down, is reopening this week, and today would be September 30th, so I guess it's opening October 1st, and it's very exciting. So they were building these prefabricated, almost mobile homes to rebuild the campus on the lower yard, if you understand how Marquez is laid out. The lower yard is basically the large concrete blacktop area, which wasn't damaged very much in the fire at all. And I guess it was a stable foundation for these mobile homes to be used as classrooms. And they are opening, and it's very exciting. They put up a little Instagram post, which was a lot of fun. I recognize some of the teachers as having taught my kids in the past. It's a little bit sad because the school is a lot smaller than it was. First of all, they can't hold that many students at that site. They are going to be rebuilding the Marquez building, I think starting in 2027 or 2028. And I was at one of the community meetings online where they showed us the layout. It looks very nice. They're going to preserve the natural character of the place. But my wife sent me this. Before the fire, the school had about 310 students. The current enrollment is 130, a drop of 58%. Before the fire, about 85% of students lived in the school's attendance zone in Pacific Palisades. Now, about 75% of the original enrollment is dispersed elsewhere, per the district's estimate. So that resonates with the story of my son's grade. He would have been in fifth grade there this year, and his fourth grade buddies are now all over the place, all over LA. We're here in DC. So people are dispersed, and obviously we're not commuting every day to go to Marquez. But still, really nice that they're reopening. The playground facilities look new and shiny and nice. The Instagram post is great. So, you know, there are these stories of rebuilding and reopening. And I want to also just recommend a really interesting article that was in the Wall Street Journal last Friday. So that would have been what? That would have been the 26th of September. It's an article about Sanibel Island. Sanibel Island is on the west coast of Florida. Beautiful, quiet little retirement tourist community. I've been there before. I had a cousin who had a timeshare or something, and I went to visit them. And it's a little bit out of the way, but that's why people like it. I also have a friend who retired there. Well, they had a massive hurricane a few years ago. I think it was Hurricane Ian, and it just devastated the island. And according to this article in the Wall Street Journal, the island is about 65% rebuilt in terms of residences that were destroyed. 80% of the restaurants that were open before the hurricane are now reopened, and they're rebuilding to new building codes and all kinds of new things they're doing. It sounded like a very familiar story where residents groups really had to band together because they weren't getting help from the insurance companies. The payouts were slow. Very, very similar story. The only thing that's really different, aside from the kind of natural disaster, you expect hurricanes in Florida like you expect earthquakes in California. You don't necessarily expect residential wildfires in California. But the other thing that was different was the article was about how slow the rebuild was. 2/3 of the way done after 3 years. If we have that in the Palisades, I think we'll be pretty happy. That wouldn't be slow for California. That would be lightning speed. So, but anyway, they say it's a slow rebuild in Florida because they have all these challenges. They're only 65% of the way there after 3 years. I mean, I think, Ron, most people would probably say it's successful, if we get there, but who knows? I'm hearing about people rebuilding. That's fun. I'm also starting to do some more work on my house, which is taking forever because of insurance situations, but it'll happen hopefully. Anyway, that's what I've got. And Ron, what have you had happening in your world lately?
Yeah, and the Lake Shrine also opened this week, which was exciting.
Oh, that's great.
Right across, yeah. You mentioned that number, 130 students out of 300, and I think it probably speaks to the larger like reconstruction, rebuild efforts around the areas, and that's kind of, you have this like hardcore, residents plus people that want to come back to Marquez, want to come back to the old schools. And then you have the outside reality of like, it's difficult to do. People have moved on. Like my kid went to Marquez, doesn't go to Marquez anymore because the school burned down, and we're not going to come back anytime soon because we have to relocate to another part of LA. And I've got older kids now in high school. That's a reality for the next few years. But I think within the larger communities, like you have this like core hardcore, like, want to live back in the Palisades as quickly as possible, want to go back to school as quickly as possible. And that's amazing. We need that for the reconstruction. However, like, when we started the podcast, Joe, we had like these discussions about, how quick would the rebuild take? We still do them like periodically. And, Oren's always like on the most hawkish side. It's like, it's going to take 5 years. It's going to take 10 years. And when we started talking about this, we said like, couple years, we hope to be back in. And I think like, from my spidey senses and what I'm hearing from the community, everybody's talking about it, that timeline is extending further and further out. Like, we used to hear 1 year, 18 months, 2 years. We don't hear that. Like now we hear it's like 3 years because we're almost on the 1 year anniversary. And yes, rebuilding is like taking shape, but it's very slow. And, talking about your Sanibel Island stories, like I still don't see like a very wide like rebuilding plan that's been initiated. It's like everybody's kind of like going about it their own way. There's no real rebuilding plan on a city level. Insurance coordination, there's emergency response. There was this, I don't feel like it's a coordinated effort. Everybody's kind of going at it their own way.
Yeah. Well, I'll just say one more thing about that or two. First of all, I should give the title and author of the article I mentioned. It's called Inside the Years-Long Effort to Rebuild a Florida Island After Hurricane Ian, and the author is Jessica Flint. So if you're looking for that online, it's at the Wall Street Journal. Yeah. Look, I think our goal still is to be back in the fall of 2027, and we want to fix our house. Our house didn't burn down. It was scorched, but it didn't actually burn. And we want to be repaired, and we want to rent the house out. We're in DC now. My wife works for the Trump administration, although she's about to get an extended vacation of sorts because the government's about to shut down. But anyway, she's here in DC, and the kids are in school here. And yeah, you start to look at time horizons. Now, as it turns out, I'm probably going to be doing a lot of work in California in the days ahead. So I'm going to be there. I mean, my mind is still in California, but there are some things that make it difficult to know when we're going to come back. And the hardest part is the schooling for the kids. I absolutely agree that where your kids go to school, you don't want to just keep yanking them out of one school and putting them in another. And so we need to sort that piece out. And they're only new at their new school here in the DC area. They've been at school now for 5 weeks, but it's going very well. And we'll see. I don't know. I mean, my wife and I tell each other every day, we actually have no idea what the future is going to be like. We just know what the next few steps are.
Totally. Like every day is a new day. And like, we can't think that many years in advance, honestly. Like since the fire in January, every week is just a week on its own. You hope you put one foot in front of the other and try to rebuild. And that's kind of like the way we're looking at it too. But yeah, it's good. Encouraging signs. I'm happy that Marquez is reopened this week. Certainly, we need like all those like grassroots things to happen in order for the full rebuild to occur.
All right. Well, let's bring Elizabeth in. She's listened to us patiently ramble about our lives and our gripes and grievances. Ron, why don't you go ahead and introduce her?
Yeah. No. So Elizabeth is a rising force in California politics. Aside from a very large social media presence, where I came to know her through like her large presence on X and other appearances on Fox, OAN, and more. She's a businesswoman, attorney, outspoken Republican leader in LA, and a graduate of UCLA and USC Law. Elizabeth, do I have that right?
Yes, all correct.
So tell us about your work, what you've been working on.
Well, my most important job is that I'm a mom of 4 little kids. My oldest is 11, my youngest is 4. So I went through the pandemic as a young mom with really little kids who were at an age where they were just starting to get socialized to school, supposed to be learning to read and write. And they were doing it on Zoom. And then when they went back to school, they were in masks. And then a vaccine mandate was coming down the road. And all of that was happening as protesters in quotes, were allowed to terrorize our city, our country, burn down our neighborhoods, and riot and loot. And so I became active as part of, that mama bear contingent that kind of just out of sheer primal instinct to protect our children, pushed back against what was going on here in California. And in that process, I became, active on social media, and I was successful in kind of making connections for people between our political climate here and what they were experiencing in their day-to-day that they were unhappy with. And so that process of, quote, waking people up to the importance of political engagement, I found myself my path was leading me into the Republican Party itself. Because even though we are in a super minority, the California Republican Party is actually very powerful nationally as well as within the state. It's very large. Its opinions, its endorsements are very powerful. And so I understood that we weren't going to get it. Well, obviously, we're not going to get anywhere on the other side, but we're not going to get anywhere from outside the Republican Party either. And so I started becoming more involved, and I'm also, my Jewish identity is also very important. And this kind of happened after October 7th, which was another reason why I felt it was important to get active and involved. And so I was elected to the LA County Republican Party for the 42nd Assembly District, which covers the Palisades and Malibu, West LA. It's basically north of Beverly Hills, west all the way to the ocean, and then north all the way up through Malibu and then Calabasas and up to the Ventura County line. So, and then through that process, I climbed kind of up the ranks a little bit in the California Republican Party statewide, and I was recently appointed chair of the Jewish community engagement for the entire state for the party. And let's see. So in terms of, what you guys talk about, because of my role, I was very outspoken about, the Palisades fire, again, making connections between the failure of leadership and the poor outcomes that people were actually living and experiencing.
It's interesting.
Yes.
Let me just jump in here, Ron. You mentioned the masks and the riots in 2020, and I'm still upset about that. It's interesting that you point to that as a source of inspiration. The masking, the vaccine mandates, I put some of that down to fear of the pandemic, and I'm a little more lenient towards some of those policies than some other people on the conservative side would be. I don't think it was obvious to anybody, at least in the beginning, what the right approach to any of this was. I'm one of those people who wore masks outdoors for the first few months of the pandemic. I mean, I had no idea. So, and I have a pretty good background in science, and I had no idea. So, I'm willing to forgive people for bad public policy choices when it comes to that. The riot, I have not forgiven, and I feel, as you do, that it was a complete abdication of the citizens by our elected officials, who aren't the same ones who are in office right now, by the way. So we're not attacking, Karen Bass or whatever. I guess Gavin Newsom was in charge of the state, but
Gavin
Eric
Newsom, everybody at the county level.
Eric Garcetti was the mayor, and he used to have these press conferences, and he used to let me in on Zoom. And so I would ask these questions. They stopped telling me about the press conferences because they didn't like my questions. But one of my favorite moments ever was in the middle of the riot. There were so many just emblematic moments during the riots. I remember he went on TV and he's like, "Well, we're going to cut the budget for police and we're going to redistribute it to communities." And meanwhile, you hear the sirens going on behind him as the police roll out for the night to enforce the curfew across LA as they're shutting down the city. And I'm like, you're cutting the police, but you need the police. They're like,
right.
Anyway, so it was so silly, but or worse than silly, really. But this one press conference, he went on this tirade about systemic racism. Okay. Now, I understand people want to do something about injustice in our society. I'm not discounting that very real motivation. Okay. But he was going on about systemic racism. So I said to him in the question and answer, I said, "What is systemic racism? Can you define it? What is it?" And he said, "Systemic racism is racism that's in the system." So, right. Okay.
It's like when you ask them to define what a woman is.
Yeah. I mean, he then went on this thing about how it's when so-and-so can get a job and so-and-so can't and so-and-so, okay. But he was just panicked, like all these politicians were panicked. And so they let themselves do these ridiculous things. And some of them were worse than ridiculous. I went back to Santa Monica. I was in Palisades at the time, but I went back to Santa Monica where my kids were still going to school at the time. They put graffiti on the courthouse, on the library. And so after the fire, and I'm going to give it back to you, but you just touched a nerve with me. After the fire, the first thing I wrote was, this started with the riots. Because how is it we don't have firefighters on the scene? We don't have police on the scene. We don't have anybody doing anything they're supposed to be doing. Oh, it's because we told an entire category of public servants that they're terrible people.
Right.
We told them that the police are bad and we're defunding them.
Right.
That's not a real serious critique or a solution for what was going wrong in policing. It's just an attack on these people who sacrificed their safety for our benefit. And so why don't we have firefighters? The vaccine mandates, I think, were crazy. When you're looking at emergency personnel, so anyway, I totally feel that. I mean, whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, whatever, before we get to the partisan labeling of it, the fact that they allowed these mobs to attack our public institutions, I'm not even talking about the businesses. Okay, of course I feel bad for it, but I mean, the courthouse, the library, and then the police were denigrated and run down. And, to me, it was, I couldn't believe it. I could not believe we were watching this. I couldn't believe it.
Yeah, and we're still paying the price of it, as you mentioned, even now. 5 years later.
So our community, I think a lot of people in Malibu and Palisades particularly, were kind of hit in the face after the fire with all the consequences of what's been happening, and the accountability crisis that we have in the city and in the state. And all of these things water failures, hydrant failures, broken trucks, poor deployment, delayed evacuations, Mayor Bass left town, no one took responsibility for anything since. And all of these things hit us kind of in the face, right, when the fires happen. But I don't feel like the rest of the, it's easy for that to happen when when we're all essentially homeless now. But I don't feel that sense of urgency outside our communities. Do you feel a different sense of urgency or awakening that's happening? I do feel it on some levels, but I don't feel the urgency as much as we have felt in say Palisades or Malibu.
Right. So that's very natural. It happened to you. It happened to, relatively small community compared to the size of the city and the county, and also it's also Altadena and the east side of the county as well was obviously very impacted. The thing about it is that these, we call them red pill moments, these moments where you're like, wait a second, they keep happening, and they keep happening in waves. The fires was why I wrote an article about this in the Daily News. So it keeps happening to people in different contexts. Charlie Kirk's assassination was another one of them, 2 weeks ago. October 7th was another one of them. The reactions that come from, certain people is another one. So in terms of urgency in the rebuilding, there is a lot of attention, I would say, on building the zoning, the attempt to rezoning for affordable housing, for example, and where they want to build that and stuff like that. Yes, there is still a lot of attention statewide about those kinds of issues. In terms of like what happened to you guys and how to fix the problem, the water also, that's another one. The water reservoirs are still empty. I think that what it's whoever thought that Spencer Pratt would be like a hero in this story, but what he's been doing is exposing so much stuff and getting national attention from Congress and people that are actually helping to uncover a lot of and investigate a lot of what's been going on, because California has been delaying that. We don't have the reports that we're supposed to get. So, and that's another thing that like wakes people up to, maybe these people in leadership that we've elected aren't really who we should be turning to, and maybe we should be looking elsewhere. Not because a lot of these positions, like local positions, are nonpartisan positions. Your partisanship is really not supposed to be relevant, but people who think differently, people who bring different skills to the table, rather than, like Karen Bass, who was in Congress and her only legislation was naming a post office, I think. So, I think that it's getting people to make those two connections, which is a very important step to bringing change and improvement to California.
How do you make people make those connections? Because I think the connection is easy in our case because, like I said, like everybody was kind of hit in the face with it. But like when you speak to people outside, they might have a red pill moment, but they might not, and they might not even make the connection actually between what's happening on the larger scale and the fact that we have the wrong people in charge. How do you make that connection for them?
For me, it's been talking about it. It's been, posting about it. And that's only in a small corner. You guys have this podcast, and Joel, you guys have Breitbart, and, the more this information gets out there, outside of our echo chamber to the people that it's actually affecting, like you didn't have water in the reservoir because the thing was broken and they didn't fix it for over a year. The fire trucks were not staged in the correct place. They were staged, 40 minutes away. That's why the fire trucks couldn't get there. The more the $100 million from the Fire Aid concert is going into NGOs that are turning out the vote in other places and are not going into the rebuild effort. They're not going into opening Marquez School, for the kids. They're going the money is being the fire was used as an exploitative moment to benefit not the people who were the victims of it, but to benefit the people in power who failed the people who were the victims of the fire. And once you explain those connections, like the money trail or the decision-making trail, people get it. People aren't stupid. They get it.
So you just brought up the money trail, and that actually reminds me of another news item I should have mentioned at the top. But we have covered the new investigation that the Senate has undertaken into the Palisades fire. Senator Rick Scott of Florida on the Committee on Aging,
Yes.
and Senator Ron Johnson of the Homeland Security Investigations Committee. He's from Wisconsin. They're doing this investigation, and Rick Scott just wrote to Sean Duffy, the Secretary of Transportation, saying he wants a full accounting of all the federal money that was spent on wildfire prevention through the Department of Transportation. Don't ask me why the Department of Transportation is the one spending the wildfire money. I mean, that was news to me. But okay, apparently there's a lot of money that comes through the Department of Transportation for brush clearance and wildfire prevention. And Rick Scott says in his letter, it's just not being spent properly in California. So he says to Duffy, I want to know where the money is being spent. Now, they're on the same team. They're both Republicans, but this is a member of the legislature exercising an oversight function over a member of the executive and saying, hey, your department spends this money. Are you wasting it? Are you following up? Is the Department of Transportation following up to find out what's happening to this money in California? Because how does this keep happening in California? So that's another little piece of news. I don't know if they're going to find out anything, and I'm not even sure that accounts for all the money that the federal government has sent to California for that purpose. But, you know, if Gavin Newsom is right when he gets up and says the federal government's not raking the forests, well, okay, I'm prepared to say, you know, even as someone who's been critical of Newsom, especially in his new sort of aggressive social media persona, you know, if he's right about that, do something about it. You know, why are we still, I mean, we have a Republican administration that, you know, you've got an opportunity now to prove that you do things differently from Democrats. Let's find out what's happening with these forests.
Well, if you ask Gavin Newsom, he's been doing everything correctly, and it was the wind that
Right.
caused everything. So you're not going to get a satisfactory answer from him, and he is not going to give the satisfaction of appearing to be working with the Trump administration in any way, because his whole presidential campaign is premised on he's going to be the fighter.
Can I comment on that too? You're totally right. You're totally right. There's no part of him right now that's saying I'm working with Trump. It was different in the pandemic. And that was also an election year, right? It was 2020. And Newsom kept saying things like everything we asked the president for, he gave us.
Yeah.
Whether it was ventilators or respirators or whatever they called them, I can't even remember. But there was all this PPE equipment that California needed, and Trump got to them. And Newsom said, hey, the president's great. Cuomo said the same thing. They hate Trump, but they were at least trying to show the public that they were working together. The public liked to see that in a moment of crisis. Now we've been through this crisis, and I'm sorry to get a little partisan about it, but all Gavin Newsom can think of is how many congressional seats he can take from one party and give to his own. And his, you know, he's going to South Carolina to campaign for president already. I mean,
yeah, that's what he's doing now.
I think that he has decided, probably correctly, that the Democratic Party primary election voters do not care about accomplishment as much as they care about willingness to fight. I don't think they're different from Republican voters in that way, by the way. If you had to pick the most qualified candidate on paper in 2015, it would have been Scott Walker of Wisconsin or someone like that. Trump was, you know, just a guy who knew how to fight, and Scott Walker had no idea what hit him. But, you know, that's what Republican voters wanted. They wanted someone to fight because they wanted to win. They got tired of losing, and Democrats are in the same mood. I just think it's tragic that we don't ever hold politicians accountable in these one-party states where everyone's a Republican or everyone's a Democrat. We don't hold politicians accountable for failure, and they just move on like nothing happened.
Right. Well, I agree with that 100%. Going back to what you said about brush clearance, and then I want to talk about Prop 50 for a second because you mentioned it.
Yeah.
So I live in the hills, and we had obviously a lot of fires in LA are started in homeless encampments. And we had a fire started by a homeless person. It was the Skirball fire, but it was kind of down by the Getty. And the hillside caught fire. And so our area, I'm also on the neighborhood council for the Bel Air Beverly Crest area, which is a high fire severity zone. So we're like half of our meetings are all about this topic, making sure we have safe evacuation routes, brush clearance, make sure that we have control of density in the area for the same reasons. But those of us who are residents here have been fighting with like the Santa Monica Conservancy, which goes all the way out to, where the Palisades are, with dealing with Caltrans. There's multiple, which is where the federal money from the Department of Transportation may be going into Caltrans. There's a whole puzzle of government agencies that control the hillsides, and none of them are doing brush clearance. And we had to, the residents had to move, heaven and earth to get somebody here to clear the hillsides, because, residents can only go up to 100 or 200 feet. And then past that, it's public land, and we're not allowed to do something there. And, people are afraid that you're going to take down a tree or a nest of a protected bird or something like that, and like the Sierra Club is going to come after you. So that these are very, very real concerns, and ultimately it's a matter of public safety, which there seems to be a war on multiple fronts with the Democrats, because it's like this thing that they can't figure out how to deal with, and so they oppose it.
Can I ask you something about that quickly?
Sure.
So brush clearance, you're 100% right. I talked to firefighters who told me that they were convinced that the inability of private homeowners to clear brush on state land next to their property was a major driver of the fire.
Yeah.
However, there is an effort now, I think, among Democrats and Republicans who recognize this. There's apparently some bill floating through Congress. I can't remember what it is, but there's some bill that would make brush clearance easier, at least on federal land. I don't know about state land.
Right.
How difficult is it to get Republicans to agree to work with Democrats? Because you have a chance here now, and there's this bipartisan solution. And I'm just speaking from a perspective within the conservative media. I think the bill is being pushed by what they call the Problem Solvers Caucus, which is like this group of moderate Democrats, moderate Republicans. The base hates those people. I mean, generally, maybe for other reasons, because of other issues or whatever. But do both parties have a problem where the voting base of the parties makes it difficult for the people who want to get things done, whether they're moderate or conservative, liberal, whatever they are? Does it make it difficult to solve problems? Because here now, finally, I hear Democrats saying the same thing Republicans are saying. Well, we have to clear the brush. Climate change is worse if the whole forest burns. So let's clear the brush.
Yes.
But is it possible to get those bipartisan solutions? Or are we so polarized now that we don't even want to work with the other side, even when they're speaking our language?
Okay. So first you said Congress on federal land, and then you said Problem Solvers Caucus, which I think is a group of state legislators.
It could be I got confused.
So that's okay. But you're right that they are criticized when they work together. And I will be the first to admit, I have criticized them as well. The reason for the criticism is because the compromise of bipartisanship only goes one way in California. It's only the Republicans that are forced to make compromises by working across the aisle with a group of legislators whose interests are not necessarily to benefit the public, but to push their ultimate agenda. And again, Prop 50 is one of those examples. But the base would never criticize or hold up legislation to clear brush. Like, everybody's on the same page about clearing brush. And in fact, it was the Republicans in the California state legislature who proposed $1 billion in wildfire prevention at the time that they were passing the budget. And it was the Democrats who took that out and wouldn't bring that to the floor, or who wouldn't accept the amendment. And so I would say that bipartisanship in and of itself, when interests are aligned, no, the base, at least on our side, is not going to hold that up. It's the compromises that Republicans make over and over again to the other side that's what drives us crazy. And so if you don't mind, like, I would love to talk with you guys about Prop 50 and how this is like an example of something that the Democrat machine and the infrastructure has completely taken over and silenced bipartisan and nonpartisan organizations whose interests are actually opposed to what they're doing. But because they depend on working with Democrats so heavily in order to get anything done, they won't oppose it. They are handcuffed, basically. And so it's only the Republican leadership in the state that is taking the lead on the opposition, even though it affects everyone, Democrat, Independent, and Republicans, almost the same. Because what happened is in 2008 and 2010, Californians passed these constitutional amendments to have independent citizens redistricting commissions for our state legislature, and then in 2010 was for our congressional lines. That ensures equal representation of Democrats, Republicans, and independents on this commission, drawing these lines in public in a transparent way. So the current lines that we have were drawn in public, like literally they're drawing the lines in public after 10,000 hours of public comment and transparent involvement by the public. What that resulted in was a map that, for example, in 2024 had the most competitive congressional districts. Of course, we're the biggest state with the most districts to begin with, but the most competitive districts than any state in the nation. And a competitive district is important because it means anybody can win, which makes everybody's vote important on all registered parties and people who are not registered, who we refer to as independents. What Prop 50 is doing is not only eliminating those kinds of safe Republican districts on the Republican side, but it is also eliminating competitive districts, 4 or 5 of them, that are currently held by Democrats, but who are vulnerable because they're 50-50 races. And it makes them safer. And what that does is it reduces accountability between the voter and the elected, because now the elected is safe and they don't have to be as responsive to the electorate of their own party, their own voters. So it affects everyone what they're doing here.
So let me jump in on Prop 50 for a second. And let me put my personal feelings aside and play a little bit of devil's advocate.
Okay, I'm ready for it.
Yeah. So since the fire, I've come into contact with a lot of people in my community and people who've come to help the community who are staunch Democrats, liberal Democrats. And I didn't really talk politics. I knew my neighbors tended Democratic before, but we didn't really talk about politics much because I'm the lonely Republican on the corner. And, I don't want to alienate everybody, so I try not to.
You're not as lonely as you think.
Yeah. But, all right. So Gavin Newsom's going to spend $250 million of state money on the special election, plus $200 million of private money coming in. That's before you even include the Republican money and Munger and all these other donors who are going to come in. So basically, we're going to see at least $500 million spent on a stupid special election instead of on helping people overcome the insurance gap to rebuild their homes, putting
Yep.
cables underground,
Yep.
putting new water tanks in the neighborhoods.
Right.
So they've got $500 million for this ridiculous congressional fight, both sides, okay? And I'm not trying to excuse my own side. I mean, I don't think I can justify what Texas did by redrawing these districts now. I'm not that critical of it because the reason they're doing it is they say that the map was drawn poorly in the first place, which I think there's a good argument you could make. I don't think we should, as Americans, be playing this racial bean counting game where, we guarantee a certain number of people from one race in a district and we shove them together with another race to make sure that there's a majority minority district, because all that does is condemn the people who live in that district to some gatekeeper who gets reelected even if they're incompetent. I mean, don't get me started on the whole use of race in congressional redistricting. I think it's silly. So I think what Texas did is the right thing. I'm just not sure they did it at the right time, and that makes it political. And that does give Democrats this very strong feeling that they want to respond. I mean, I've talked to people in our community who say, I agree that what Newsom's doing is absurd, but somebody has to fight back. We can't let these Republicans draw their own districts in Texas. We feel disenfranchised because we're going to stay in the minority in the House. We want a fair, competitive election. So we need to respond and at least even it out, which we can do in California. My response to that is sue Texas in federal court. Why are we destroying our political system? That's not what we've done traditionally as Californians. That's not what Democrats have even done. Democrats have sued. Democrats are very good at suing, better than Republicans, because, Republicans lost all those cases in 2020. So sue them. But no, Newsom is, I think they didn't come up with this district map out of nowhere, right? They've been sitting on this for a while. They've had demographers and all kinds of people planning this out. They had this map ready. There's no way they did it in 3 weeks. So I think the Texas thing is a pretext for what they wanted to do anyway, to create, as you say, less competitive seats, make safety for incumbents. The Senate Majority Leader and House Speaker in the California legislature apparently have drawn themselves congressional districts that they can run in. It's so sleazy. And the voters already went to the polls and decided in 2008 that we weren't going to do that kind of thing anymore. So anyway, but I'm supposed to be playing devil's advocate here. Okay, so the devil's advocate position is, if you're a Democrat in California and you're frustrated by what the national government is doing, and you feel very passionately about it, and you see what Texas did, why shouldn't Newsom respond in some way? And you might say the courts, it's going to be too late. The election's going to be going, and maybe it'll be, the Supreme Court 6-3 conservative majority. They're never going to find it in our favor. We feel disenfranchised. This is our way of responding. I mean, what's the answer to that? Because I know how I feel about it, but how do you explain it?
Okay, the answer to that is we have a constitution and a rule of law, and that is fundamental to our country. And you don't just throw out the Constitution because you feel you're at a disadvantage going into an election. So you have to play by the rules. The rules are what happened in Texas, and I'm glad you mentioned the race-based, the coalition districts, because a lot of people don't understand that. So let me just explain it. The narrative is that President Trump demanded Texas to find him 5 more seats because he, won the state. That is not what happened. What happened was the Biden administration in 2021 sued in Texas over the drawing of county commissioner lines that did not take race into account. So the Biden administration's position was you were supposed to take race into account and draw race-based districts in your county commission election, and I think it was Galveston County. The Biden administration lost that case. It went up to the Fifth Circuit. They lost that case. There is a court order saying that race-based districts in the Fifth Circuit are unconstitutional under the 14th and I think 15th Amendment. Okay? Then nothing got done, obviously, because the Biden administration is not going to redraw the districts, and they can hide behind, we don't draw districts midway unless, but there was a court order that is binding that said that these districts are unconstitutional. Biden administration kicked the can down the road. Trump administration comes in. Harmeet Dillon, civil rights, from the Civil Rights Division. She's from California.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right? She sends a letter to Texas saying these 4 districts, these are race-based coalition districts. They are unconstitutional. We are going to sue you if you don't redraw the districts because they are unconstitutional. Now, if you believe in the United States Constitution and that we should not have race-based districts, if that's the rule of law, then what is the argument? No, we should be ignoring the Constitution. We should be ignoring court orders. No, that is not that's not partisan. We have to respect the Constitution. We have to respect the rule of law.
I'll add to that by saying, sorry to interrupt you. I'll add to that by saying we also have a California Constitution. And
I was going to get to that.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, Texas doesn't have what we have. Texas is, the old-fashioned way of a bunch of politicians get in a room and decide what the map looks like.
Yeah, and you can argue that our way is the gold standard that the California voters put into place. And by the way, independent commissions are popular in California. You know how we know? Because LA in 2024 voted for Measure DD by almost 75%,
right,
which is an independent commission to draw our city district lines. And obviously Los Angeles is the biggest city in California. And so you can kind of extrapolate that out to other Democrats who support the concept of an independent commission, which is why the question on the ballot says we're not getting rid of the independent commission and we want this to be, the federal way, because the people who drafted the language, which is the Gavin Newsom administration, they understand that the Independent Citizens Commission is popular in California. And so going back to your question of this is just, trying to tap into that feeling on the base of wanting to fight back against the Trump administration. This is purely partisan. And that, again, is contrary to what we really want, which is nonpartisan district drawing that's fair for everyone. And then let the candidates fight over the votes rather than having the politicians pick their voters so that they can get a predetermined outcome. That is contrary to democracy, which the Democrats are saying we have to fight for democracy. It's
right.
Exactly opposite.
My problem is just whatever your feeling is about it, $250 million of state money.
Yeah. When we haven't funded Prop 36, which again, something that Californians voted for 70% of the vote.
That's the tough on crime. That's the
right where what the funding is for is to increase mental health beds. So no state funding.
We're not funding that?
Was in the budget. Nope.
How are we going to get homeless people off the street if we don't?
They are pushing that
beds?
Responsibility onto the counties to fundraise for that, which is why you're going to see stuff on the ballot coming up in 2026 to increase taxes at the county level.
Is there too much on the ballot? Every year people write to me like, Joel, what do I vote for?
Yes. So I have my own voter guides. And if your listeners want to follow me on social media, every election I come out with a voter guide that goes through the whole ballot, because everybody knows the headliners, but then you open your ballot and the first thing that you see is community college trustee. And then you get completely thrown off the rest of the ballot. You have no idea what you're doing, and it's very overwhelming. The Prop 50 ballot that's coming out next week on Tuesday has one question on it. You fill it out. It's a yes or no question. I am advocating for the reasons that I have explained that you vote no. No matter what party you are affiliated with, it is going to disenfranchise the voters.
That's the only thing on the ballot? There's nothing else on the ballot?
The only thing on the ballot. It is a special election.
So we're having all these ballots printed and sent everywhere.
Correct. Universal mail ballots, also another waste of money and resources, which is why it's so expensive. So yes, you're going to get one ballot, one question on it. You fill out one little bubble. I'm advocating for a no vote. You put it back in the envelope, you sign and date it, and you put it back in your mailbox the same day. And if this is something that, you actually feel passionate about, like I do, you also then have to spend the rest of the month helping other people do the exact same thing. And this is actually really important for your Palisades listeners who are not in their homes, but are still registered to vote at their address. You can remain registered at your Palisades address, but have your ballot sent wherever you are. So you can have your ballot, Joel, sent to DC and you can vote by mail that
Is that
way.
true? I actually have a question
Yes.
about that because I have not re-registered in DC. When I had to get a DC driver's license, it's the rule. Once you're here for 60 days, and my 60 days is coming up in a few days, you have to have a DC driver's license. So I applied for the license, but they say, we'll automatically enroll you as a voter unless you say no. And I said no,
Okay.
thinking I'm registered in California. I still want to vote in California if it's legal to do so. I don't know because I have a DC driver's license now.
Well, if your primary residence is California, you should be able to still vote.
I don't know. I'm kind of, what's the word for gender confused when you're residentially
well,
resident?
we'll look that up after that. That'll be the thing we'll do.
I mean, my
We'll look
house
that
is
up
in
after this.
My house is
After
in
this.
Palisades, but I wake up in DC nowadays. I am going to be in California a lot more often, but I'm not going to be living at my house because I can't. So I don't know what to do. I really want to vote in this thing. I want to vote no on Prop 50, but I wish this election weren't happening. I want them to take the $250 million and build a new school at Marquez so they don't have to sit in prefab classrooms. Anyway, whatever.
Yeah.
So I have a question, maybe like around ineligible voters, and Elizabeth, this is a larger question about red blue California. I've been reading a lot about ineligible voters being thrown off the rolls in California.
Yeah, inactive.
Inactive. 3
Inactive
million,
voters, yes.
3 million plus, right? And if you read some social media accounts, they say California is a lot closer than you think in terms of red blue and ahead of the next elect. What's your view on that?
Okay.
I know there's like some kind of confusion about this. Like,
Yeah.
how close
Okay.
are the votes?
So if you haven't voted in the last 4 elections, you automatically get downgraded to an inactive voter. It means you're registered to vote, but you're not active anymore. And inactive voters don't get ballots. So the controversy is whether the people who think that there is fraud and cheating going on in California is if they're using the inactive voter rolls to do that. That is the controversy. I don't know enough about their theory to say whether or not that is true. But what I do know is that there is enough active voters and floating ballots out there for active voters that they could, if they wanted to do funny business, they could do it using those. So that's the cheating part. Okay. I don't want to comment on that. But cleaning the inactive voter rolls is not making California redder because our registration numbers and our voting results is only the universe of active voters. So inactive voters are already not part of that analysis. When we look at a district and we figure out if it's competitive, for example, we look at the difference between the number of registered Republicans and the number of registered Democrats. And we go through an analysis to see whether or not that is a toss-up district or if it's going to lean one way or the other. That's only based on the active voter rolls. And of course, we know that, about 40%, give or take, vote Republican in California, even though our registration is 22, 25, something like that percent. So we overperform by a lot. And so the notion that there is this widespread cheating that is flipping the whole state when the Democrats are winning statewide elections by millions of votes, no, I don't believe that.
We have almost reached an hour, and you've been incredibly generous with your time. I want to just give you a chance to round things out. And Ron, unless you have more questions, I have one sort of summing it all up question. But why don't you jump in quickly before I...
Go for it, Joel.
Okay.
You sum it up.
So this is the real big question. I mean, Ron kind of alluded to it earlier when he said, are you seeing the same sense of urgency or outrage outside of the fire district? You know, the fire-prone areas, the fire zone. Is California ready for change? I think Ron asked this in another way, right? Ron, you were saying basically like Republican presence and so forth. I mean, I've been telling people, I think the Republican Party can do something in California, but really right now, honestly, just if I take off whatever partisan hat I might have and just look at it analytically, I think a lot of the action is going to be moving toward moderate Democrats. That might be the best hope right now, given how many Democrats there are in California, how hard it is for Republicans to win statewide. I could be wrong. But let me again, take away the partisan labels. How confident are you that California can actually fix what's broken? Because I look at Karen Bass moving on beyond the fires and going on about ICE raids. I get that people are upset about ICE raids, but that's not our jurisdiction. That's the federal government, right? But she's now decided to make that her issue. Gavin Newsom going on X and making fun of the president. I get that there's an audience for it. It doesn't help me.
No.
So people are tolerating it though. So is there really a possibility of change in California? Can we actually fix this? And can we do it? Is it even possible to fix? You mentioned earlier, Elizabeth, that there are all these multiple layers of government. Nobody knows what's going on, even on a hillside. I mean, can we fix this thing?
Okay, I love this question. The answer is yes, because we have to. Because as goes California, so goes the nation. We are too important of a state to the country to become a failed, or to continue to exist as a failed state. You know, people move, obviously, that's one way to deal with California. But my personal opinion is that you cannot outrun what is happening here. And if you surrender the front line, all that happens is whatever is coming at you is going to move closer to you. And so you can, the most obvious example of that is Gavin Newsom is moving from governor of the state of California to running for president of the United States. You cannot outrun California, no matter in any of the other 49 states. That's number one. Number two, you mentioned moderate Democrat. So I have a theory, and I talk about it online all the time, that there is no such thing as a moderate Democrat, because the radical far left in their party has been so successful at taking over the infrastructure, the levers of power within the party, that anyone who even wants to who characterize themselves as a moderate Democrat cannot get anywhere in the party without without bowing down to or giving themselves up to the people who control the power and the money, which is the far left. And I don't like to attack Rick Caruso because I hope that he decides to run for mayor of the city of LA, but he is an example of that, where he wants to run as this more moderate voice, and yet he's doing things like, supporting Prop 50. He's doing things like, criticizing the ICE raids, even though that is one of border security enforcement and immigration is one of President Trump's most popular issues, even with Democrats, but not necessarily in Los Angeles. And they are making people afraid of law enforcement, just like they made people afraid of the police 5 years ago.
I think that's
it is
true.
no different.
I didn't know Caruso was supporting Prop 50.
Yeah.
Wow.
Everyone
$250 million we can spend on redistricting, but I mean,
as a businessman, short of nothing else, like that should be a no right there. It's like 250 million, probably double that amount, Joel, as you said, that could be going to like such better causes than this nonsense.
He has to. He will not get the endorsements, the money, the support that he needs unless he goes along with the program. And the program is run by the far left.
See, I think like these politicians, that they choose this path and like they go on an inauthentic path. Because I know, I don't know Rick Caruso personally, but I know that, you know, if you ask Rick Caruso a couple of years ago if he's not running for office, does he support Prop 50 or yes or no, he would say, no, I don't support it. Because, and these are inauthentic ways of like, you know, sneaking their way into like the policies, is I feel like with the voters, it catches up with you. People see that.
Yes,
it's they don't like
correct.
it.
That is correct. Yeah. It's inauthentic, and people will see through that, and it has been ineffective. The moderates have completely lost control of their party, and they're not in any shape to take it back anytime soon.
I'll just close this out by saying we are open. We've had Democrats on the show before, and we're open to. We would love Rick Caruso to come on. We keep inviting him, and you know he doesn't want to come on because he's getting advised by a moderate Republican not to do it. So I'm told. Anyway, Elizabeth Barcohana, can you tell us where we can find out more about what you're doing? More information.
Yes. So I am on X at _Barcohana. I am on Instagram at Elizabeth from California. I have a website, elizabethbarcohana.com, and I have just started a 501c3 with the Lincoln Club of Orange County to work on voter registration. It's called Vote Gold. So there's going to be more information coming out about that.
I love it. Not blue, not red, gold.
That's
Perfect.
Right. We're the Golden State.
Golden State. All right, listen, this has been Three Homeless Guys minus our friend Oren, but for myself, Joel, and for Ron, thank you, Elizabeth, and thank you, the listeners and viewers. Please subscribe and like and share and send us an email, pod@threehomelessguys.com. You can get all our episodes at threehomelessguys.com. Until next time, stay strong.
Thanks for listening to Three Homeless Guys. If this episode hit home, please subscribe to our channel. Check out threehomelessguys.com for RSS feeds to your favorite streaming service. Follow us on social and share this with a friend who needs to hear it. Drop us a review or shoot us a message at pod@threehomelessguys.com. We'd love to hear from you. Stay strong, and we'll catch you next time.